All right. So today's session is divided into three main topics: the cosmic cycles of the soul, our spiritual and material destiny, and the preparation for Laylatul Qadr. Dr. HASSAM will be speaking on each of the topic for about 15 minutes, and we will be fielding questions as we go. So since this is an interactive session, I encourage everybody to send their questions during each segment through the chat box. Everybody's on mute right now, but feel free to turn on your video cams if you prefer. I would like to thank Dr. HASSAM on behalf of everybody for just taking out the time, joining and sharing his knowledge on the topic. And before we begin, we will see recitation and translation of Surah Qadr.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر.
Indeed, we sent the Quran down during the night of decree.
وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر.
And what can make you know what is the night of decree?
ليلة القدر خير من ألف شهر.
The night of decree is better than 1,000 months.
تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر.
The angels and the Spirit descend therein by permission of their Lord for every matter.
سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر.
Peace it is until the emergence of dawn.
All right, before I hand it over to Dr. HASSAM, just want to make sure one more thing, that if you guys can, on the top of your Zoom screens, shift from the gallery view to the speaker view, you will be able to see both the slides that Dr. HASSAM is presenting and himself when he's speaking. So over to you, Dr. HASSAM.
Yali Madat, everyone. Thank you very much for your very kind invitation to address this important topic, which is a topic which is so vast that I don't think a single seminar could do justice to it. But today's presentation is intended to give you a snapshot of some of the perspectives of this Laylatul Qadr. And hopefully the angle that I'm taking today is that one which pertains specifically to our tariqah. Many of you over the years have heard about Laylatul Qadr, and there have been wonderful, wonderful descriptions, lectures, and explanation of what this night is all about. So I hope what I'm about to present to you today will hopefully add on to what has already been built and presented. Many of you know that the meaning of Laylatul Qadr, Layl means night, and the word Qadr has many meanings. Laylatul Qadr has been defined in many different perspectives, like the night of power, the night of destiny, the night of majesty, the night of reverence, the night of descent, the night of might, and many other words that are almost unexplainable, because this is such a momentous event and such a vast area that no single word can qualify it. Laylatul Qadr in our tariqah is held on the 23rd night of the month of Ramzan, which is going to be on this coming Friday, May the 15th. And it is a day which requires a level of understanding and preparation, but more so grace and mercy that comes from our beloved Imam and our faith in the practice and understanding of this important concept. There are two aspects to the spiritual significance of this holy night. Simply put, there is the collective aspect of Laylatul Qadr when people get together, and there is the individual experience of the individual person engaged into this night. I would like to qualify the perspective that I'm going to be taking. And in that regard, I would like to remind you of a farman that Maulana Hazrat Imam made uh, in November 18, 1978, in which he says that the Shia Ismaili Tariqa is an esoteric Tariqa. Exoteric means, in simple words, that which is visible, that which everyone can grasp, that which has no internal hidden meaning. The esoteric means that which has an internal meaning that is explained by the Imam to those who seek it, unquote. It is against this background that I would like to share the perspective I'm presenting to you this morning. I would like to add to this that on November 22nd, 1967, in referring to the Holy Quran, Maulana Hazrat Imam said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said that he has reminded the Jamaat that when we read the Quran, when we learn parts of the Quran, then we should understand their esoteric meaning. And our beloved Imam reminds us and says that remember that our branch of Islam is an esoteric branch of Islam. That is fundamental for us to understand what this night of Laylatul Qadr means to us. And our beloved Imam defines the word esoteric, and he says esoteric means that what is written is there, but its meaning is not there to everyone. It is there only to those who are part of our Jamaat. And it is important, therefore, that if you learn parts of the Quran, you should be able to explain the esoteric meaning of those parts, unquote. So, the esoteric part of the Quran, as by now you understand, and you should also make reference to the preamble to our constitution, where the function of the Imam in relation to the final revelation is well explained, and I may bring it to you if time permits. So Laylatul Qadr, first of all, in its outer shell, is a reminder to everyone that it is on this auspicious day, and I say auspicious because the word auspicious has connotation of prosperity, blessing, grace. Auspicious means a day that is beneficial, a day in which there is divine grace and mercy, and many other aspects which are difficult to just confine into words. But simply saying it is a blessing from heaven. It is a blessing that comes from the celestial sphere to the terrestrial sphere. And this word auspicious simply is there to ensure that you activate your understanding to see how important this day is, as we will see as we proceed. In regards to the esoteric, our beloved fifth Imam, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, says that the book of God contains four things. So here the Imam describes what is in the Holy Quran. And the Imam says, number one, there is the announced expression, which he calls ibadah. That is the literal expression. And the Imam said, this is for the common people, the awam. Then there is the allusion, ishara. It is for the intellectual elite, people who reflect, people who think, people who wants to read between the lines, people who says, what does this mean? How does this relate to other things? In other words, it is the exercise of reason, the exercise of intelligence, the exercise of analysis, and so on. Then there is a third meaning, and that is the hidden meaning related to the suprasensible world, known as lataif. And it is for the friends of God, or saints, or we say awliya, people like Jalaluddin Rumi and of the kind, the expression they have given to the revelation. For example, in the whole of the Masnavi, many Sufis in Islam recognize the Masnavi of Jalaluddin Rumi as the Quran in Persian language. Needless to say how important Rumi's poetry and renderings have become into the Western world. The fourth meaning is the spiritual truth, haqaiq, that comes from the word hakikat. And these are for prophets. So the fourth meaning is the one that we are concerned with when we speak about the meaning of the revelation. In other words, when we look at the meaning of the Holy Quran, the meaning of the hakikat, the meaning of the haqaiq, the fourth meaning is what is important to us. Further in this regard, I'd like to point out to you that in the concept of understanding the meaning of the Holy Quran, if you look at our constitution, it says it is the Imam who gives the ta'wil and the ta'lim of the final message. It is the Imam who gives that interpretation. Now the word ta'wil simply means esoteric explanation. It means a spiritual explanation. And the act of going from the zahir to the batin, from the exoteric to the esoteric, is known as ta'wil. And ta'lim refers to the spiritual wisdom that the Holy Imam gives to the Jamaat, to the Murids in this regard, so that we may apply on our day-to-day living the message that has come from heaven. I should also point out that in Shia Islam, the notion of the book and the Imam are related by the following understanding. The holy book that came to the Holy Prophet, it is known as Quran-e-Samit, meaning the silent book. But the Holy Imam is considered to be the spoken Quran, Quran-e-Natiq. Hence, our beloved Imam, in his guidance to the Jamaat, exercises that function. You may remember that on December 13, 1964, our beloved Imam says to the Jamaat, and again I bring to your notice simply this farman, that Maulana Hazrat Imam says that his Noor has indicated to you where and in which direction to turn, so as to obtain spiritual and worldly satisfaction. When you think about this concept, that actually underlines everything that needs to be said about Laylatul Qadr. In other words, the concept of Noor. When we speak about the Quran, we are speaking about the concept of Noor. There are 49 references in the Quran about Noor. But the Noor of Allah is the Noor of the Imam. And it is that Noor that guides us by virtue of the holy farmans the Imam makes to his Jamaat. The meaning of the book is not only the text, it is also, in our case, in the case of what Shia Islam says, it is the Imam who guides. Mawla Murtazali alayhi salam says, I am the meaning of Ramzan. I am Laylatul Qadr, mentioned in the mother of books. Mawla Murtazali says, Hazrat Ali says, my utterance is decisive, for I am Surah Al-Hamd. I am the purpose of prayer itself, whether at home or when it's traveling. I am the purpose of fasting and the sacred anniversaries in the months of the year. So this quotation of Hazrat Ali comes from Khutbah al-Iftikar, that is one of the sermons that Mawla Murtazali alayhi salam gave. Now you may wonder in this particular segment 1, why is it that the name cosmic significance is given? Just before I turn to part 1 on the cosmic cycle of the soul, why is it that we have underlined the cosmic significance? What is the cosmic significance? Why this big word, cosmic? First of all, you know, the word cosmic is used in many sense, but in my case here, the idea is it goes beyond Earth. It goes beyond our galaxy. It goes beyond what the universe means. And why do I say that? Because remember, when the Holy Prophet received this message, it was a message that was entrusted to him. And he was at the age of 40 into that cave of the mountain of light known as Jabal al-Nur, in which this revelation came to him. And the question we ask, what was entrusted to him? What was that revelation in its totality which took 23 years for the Prophet to bring to humanity? At the end of that cycle, meaning at the end of the time when the 23rd year of his mission came, you will remember this part that is in our holy dua. The Prophet has been told, O Prophet, bring to humanity the message that we entrusted to thee, and if thou dost not deliver it, thou wilt not fulfill thy mission. Imagine this guidance to the Prophet. The Prophet has been said, you are entrusted with the message. It's time to deliver it to the people. And if you don't do it, then your mission would have failed. When did that mission begin? It began on the day of Laylatul Qadr, on the 23rd night of Ramzan, when the Holy Prophet first received this message. And then he's informed to ensure that this message is now delivered. What was the message? In the Ismaili Tariqah, this message is interpreted as follows. I'm defining for you why is being said the word cosmic. The creation of the world, the sending of all the prophets, the revelations of all the sacred books, all of these were intended in order that humanity could come to know him. About whom? About whom? This is important. We have spoken through every prophet and who became manifested at the time of Muhammad, unquote. This is the quotation of Holy Pir Shabuddin Shah in his text, The True Meaning of Religion. Simply put, 124,000 prophets came. According to tradition, 104 books were revealed, of which the last one was the Holy Quran. What was the purpose of all these prophets to come? What was the purpose of all the revelation? In fact, what was the purpose of creation itself? Hence the word cosmic. It was for the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to declare to humanity the imamat, the holy imamat of Mawla Murtaza Ali alayhi salam, and to set in motion the whole cycle of imamat till the end of the day of Qiyamah and resurrection. In other words, humanity was not to be left without guidance. Though divine inspiration and divine revelation ceased at the time of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but divine guidance was to continue till the end of times, and that was to be the responsibility, and that was to be the prerogative of the Imam of the times. Hence, the cosmic significance. So this notion of the imamat is not something even historically one can just take for granted or can take lightly. And I think many of you are aware of the history of the imams, and in particular, many of the things that our beloved 49th Imam has spoken and said in many official settings is very explanatory of the role of imamat today as it was in the past. Having said that, one must now link the notion of how does Laylatul Qadr come into effect when it engages the individual to understand this message. So let us turn to the cosmic cycles of the soul. I would like to request that we have one of the kinans that would be a transition part to this subject. So perhaps I can request the organizer, Serish, to activate that.
Great. Amira, you should be unmuted.
All right, thank you. Hakatu pa Dasha Mehrabana Biyali Tuhi Tu Rabatu Rahima Natu Aliyavala Akhar Kazi Tuhi Tu Te Upaya Te Nipaya Sirajana Har Ali Tuhi Tu Jala Thala Mula Mandala Rana Ali Hukama Tera Bhi Tuhi Tu Teri dosti bolya pira shama same banda tera ali tuhi tu. Translation: You are the eternal truth, and you are the holiest divine being. To you belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth. Most gracious also are you, O Ali, you and none else but you. You are the sustainer of all beings, and most merciful are you. The beginning of all things is from you, and the end of everything is unto you. You and none else but you. You have created, and further you have given order and proportion to your creation. Indeed, you brought everything into existence, O Ali, you and none else but you. You are the origination of the heavens and the earth, and everything which belongs to dry land and water on this earth. And your rule is extended over all of them, O Ali, you and none else but you. Under the grace of your companionship, Pir Shams has proclaimed that I have also submitted my whole self before you, O Ali, you and none else but you.
Thank you. And I would like to say to all the listeners and the participants that my objective in this presentation is to give you a snapshot. This is by no means a complete description of everything, but at least if you have a snapshot in front of you, it will open up some other doors and some other opportunities for you to think and to analyze and to connect the dots, if you like. You have heard this Ginan, Haktu Baktu. In similar, the similar themes are often conveyed in some of the beautiful qasidas that are recited. But in the interest of time, I would have wished we had a qasida also, but it is not going to be possible in this presentation right now to do so. In this Ginan, why was this Ginan chosen? It was chosen simply to convey to the listeners that look, in these 5 verses of the Ginan, if you were to say to yourself, what was the purpose of the Holy Prophet's mission? This was the purpose. What this Ginan basically says about Hazrat Ali alayhi salam as our beloved first revealed Imam, and in seeking to promote the understanding of the position of the Imamate. Now understand, members of the Jamaat and listeners, that this is an esoteric concept. And you have heard the meaning of esoteric. That meaning is not there for everyone, but it is there to those who are part of our Jamaat. So I would like you, in that regard, to ensure that you understand it is an inner meaning of things. And it is a meaning that comes from the haqa'iq, the haqiqah. And it is in that context we must leave it and try to understand it. Having said that, I have to add this footnote as we speak about the cosmic cycles of the soul, that I hope by now you understand that the perspective in the esoteric is very different than the perspective in the exoteric. If you are seeking to understand Islam from the exoteric point of view, that's one perspective. But if you seek to understand Islam from an esoteric point of view, then that is the emphasis our Ismaili Tariqah is most strongly and specifically concerned with. Hence, the guidance and directive of the Imam to the Jamaat through his holy farmans. In addition, it is important to understand that our meaning is different than others. So to cross-compare is simply not sometimes a good idea, because the inner meaning is defined to us by the Imam. And it is that meaning which is most significant in terms of our spiritual progress, spiritual enlightenment, and spiritual salvation. Therefore, we now speak about the concept of the cycles of the soul. Now, what is the cosmic cycle of the soul? It is in itself a subject that requires a full treatment. But simply put, the soul has gone through many cycles. Can you put the next slide, please? So let me address the notion of spiritual transformation and physical manifestation. In one of the farmans, our beloved Imam says, and I paraphrase, that the soul is created and given physical form. And you must understand that in your own perspective, and there are many ways that explanation has been given. But in one of the interpretation, it is the soul has taken many rounds into this physical planet. In other words, the soul, spiritual by nature, has engaged itself in many physical manifestations. And one good example that we have from us is from the writings of Jalaluddin Rumi. Put the next slide, please. So this quotation comes from the Holy Farman of Imam Sultan Muhammad alayhi salam on September 29, 1899. And many of you are familiar with this quotation, therefore I have brought it back here. And when you see this quotation, our beloved Imam says that Maulana Rumi declared that he had once existed in the form of inanimate rock. I would beg the question to you and say, can you imagine yourself as an inanimate rock? Were you a rock at one point in time in your spiritual evolution? But there it is. Rumi says that he was an inanimate rock. And from this, he evolved into plant life, from which becoming a tiny worm. He finally attained an animal existence. From the latter, he acquired a human life. So if you look at his transition, inanimate rock to plant life, to tiny worm, to animal existence, to human life, you will of course realize that the common underlying factor is the soul. It's the soul that occupies these various forms. Now, there are multiple interpretations that are given to this particular verse. Remember, in addition to this particular aspect in the Masnavi, Jalaluddin Rumi says, I remember 100,000 of my birth that I have taken. He speaks about it in terms of the many mentions that his soul and spirit has taken. So if you read the Masnavi, you will find that perspective. Then he continues to say, where should I go from hence? Meaning, here I am as a human being now. Where should I go from now? And he says, I shall soar like an angel, and thence I shall rise even higher. The whole idea behind this is simply to bring to perspective to say that, look, in the night of Laylatul Qadr, when the revelation came to the Holy Prophet, and you know the mission behind this revelation, what it was, how does the individual believer, collectively or individually, can benefit from that revelation? The simple answer is salvation. Salvation of the soul. But how can the soul achieve salvation unless the intellect gets illuminated? And one of the profound meaning of revelation that came to our Holy Prophet was that revelation removes the obstacles in front of the intellect so that it can achieve illumination. In the practice of our tariqah in regard to this concept, it is the holy farmans of the Imam that provides that gate that brings illumination to the intellect of the murid, and through that intellectual illumination, that murid is able to open the path and door of salvation. And this is why in our tariqah, the Farmans of the Imam are the basis which provides the soul liberation, freedom, and salvation. So whenever you hear the holy Farman of the Imam, remember it means the salvation of the soul. And the holy Farmans of the Imam is a guidance to us in our material life and more so into our spiritual life. Hence the whole concept of Din and Dunya. So why should you go through inanimate rock and plant life and tiny worm and animal existence and now into the human form? So the question is, how are you going to cross that bridge? Where will you go from here? That is where the grace, the mercy, the compassion, the love, the grace of the Imam descends upon our soul, upon our life, through his mercy that opens the gate for that salvation. Laylatul Qadr for the Mu'mins represents that possibility, represents that search, that is carried out under the guidance of the Imam for the ultimate goal, and that is for the soul of the Murid to become one with the holy Nur of the Imam after this human life. Hence, the notion of Inna Lillahi wa Inna Ilaihi Raji'un, and hence this idea, I shall soar like an angel, and thence I shall rise even higher. Next slide, please. Now, talking about the cycle, just a quick snapshot. As I said earlier on, this concept requires a complete treatment in itself. So what are these words? Before I say something about it, let me just say to you that the cosmology of the soul is a big word. What does the word cosmology mean? Cosmology can also mean a map. When I say cosmology of the universe, it's perhaps one may say, how is the universe structured? What is the structure of the universe? How do we understand, at least to the day that we are, the universe is constituted? But remember, in the Holy Quran, there are Quranic terminology that speaks about different levels of reality, like Alme Nasud, Alme Lahud, Alme Bahud, Alme Jabarut, and so on. In the Holy Ginans and in Ismaili scripture by other dais in other periods of time, there are other cosmological models, meaning a map that is given to show how creation came into being and how the life forms in that creation came into existence and the interplay between the two. So if you look at, for example, there is a whole cosmology by Ibn Arabi, there are cosmology by other Ismaili dais, and they have been narrated and they have been codified by these dais in various means, which we cannot do into this presentation because of the length of it. But here I'm taking words that you may be familiar with, and if you go, for example, into this arrow, starting at the end, the four jugas are actually part of the concept of kala. Now, juga means a cycle of time. And there are four of them, so they have four different cycles, four different numbers. But before the jugas, there was the period of kalap or kalpas. And one kalap, for example, is 4,320,000,000 years. And there were four of them. And then before the kalap, you had periods of Qadr. And Qadr is a greater cycle than the four kalaps put together. And there were three of them. And before the period of Qadr, there was a period of time, a cycle of time known as Chokri. And there were 84 of them. And prior to the period of Chokri, there were even greater period, and they are parts of understanding this whole notion of evolution and creation, that is to say, physical creation and spiritual manifestation. Now, what was the point of mentioning all of this to you? Simply to say, in all of these periods, there were different forms of life that came and got salvated. And the history of and the cosmology of these time cycles again requires a different treatment and explanation when the time would be there. But we are most familiar with the last four jugs. So if you can see the next slide, these last four jugs, meaning the last four cyclical period in which our soul is actually past. And that was the Golden Age, Karta Yug, the Silver Age, Treta Yug, the Bronze Age, Dwapar Yug, and the Iron Age, that is Kal Yug. Many of you are familiar of the word Kal Yug. We speak about Kal Yug all the time in many different ways in our conversation, sometimes in joking, when people do certain things and people say, well, it is Kal Yug and that's why we do it. Well, the idea is, of course, to understand that these cycles of time have to do also with our spiritual evolution. And why this is golden, silver, bronze, and iron, it is because this is a decreasing importance of spirituality, and it is being symbolized by the decreasing value, symbolically speaking, of the alchemy of metal. So gold is more important than silver, silver is more important than bronze, and bronze is more important than iron. In fact, iron is completely useless compared to gold. So the idea is, if you look at the hadith of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that in the golden age, there was 92.5% spirituality and 7.5% the opposite. In the Silver Age, the rate diminished. In the Bronze Age, it continued to diminish. And now, in the age that we are living in, it's the reverse. There is 97.5% evil in opposition and only 2.5% spirituality. So the challenge that we have in such an era is to say, how are we ever going to make it? The revelation that came to the Holy Prophet on the night of Laylatul Qadr was indeed a gate and a response also to this question. Because remember, this happened in this age, according to this cosmology, in this period of Kal Yug. And after all, he is the final prophet. By the way, I have to mention this. There is a Hadith Qudusi of the Holy Prophet. You know the meaning of Hadith Qudusi? Hadith Qudusi means it is something the Holy Prophet said in which God used the Holy Prophet's tongue to speak. So God spoke directly using the holy tongue of the Prophet. And the Hadith Qudusi says, O Muhammad, had it not been for you, I would not have brought creation into existence. And in another place it is said, had it not been for Ali, I would not have created you, unquote. It is important to understand this hadith because I once again point out to you that from a spiritual point of view, the whole message of Laylatul Qadr was directed to those souls and those who understood the esoteric, that even the origins of Islam came from Hazrat Ali alayhi salam. And that foundation of Islam, that was Hazrat Ali alayhi salam, continued in its various manifestations throughout history. But the foundation, the absolute root that kept Islam in its course was Hazrat Ali alayhi salam, hence that revelation, hence that mission, hence that particular message to all the believers spoken in spoken in the concept of walayat. In Shia Islam, we have the notion of walayat. In fact, that is what that message was. O Prophet, I entrust to you this message, and unless you convey Ali's walayat. What is walayat? Walayat is defined as the love and devotion to and for the Imam. Why is that? Because the love and devotion to and for the Holy Imam is equal to the love and devotion to and for Allah Himself. For these reasons, the walayat in this sense constitutes the foundational pillar in Shia Islam and in Ismailism in particular. In other words, it is the imamat. And in this regard, it is through the walayat the believers receives divine illumination of the soul and the intellect. And it is this illumination of the soul and intellect that becomes the guiding light for everything in the life of a true believer. This is the highest gift bestowed upon the murid by the Imam. That is the divine illumination that comes from the Imam through his nur to the soul of the murid. And this illumination is the basis of our spiritual liberation and freedom, which our soul promotes, which our faith promotes. And our faith promotes this essence, that the essence of religion is freedom of the soul. And therefore, in this era of Kaljug, we rely upon that gate, that explanation, that tawil, that talim, that our beloved Imam gives us in our daily living, and to guide us how we may conduct ourselves in our dunya and in our deen to achieve the salvation. Can I have the next slide, please? So I've just said something about this, and I may have to say something more, but let me just add a footnote to everything that I've said. You know that Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah alayhi salam, in his historic farman that I quoted earlier on when the name of Rumi was mentioned, the Imam says the essence of religion is to abandon false conception. The Imam says God is the creator. He does not benefit from your worship. To gladden him should be your real aim. But he can be glad only when you are glad. And look what the Imam says. And you will never be glad until such time as you are able to throw off your bondage. What bondage is the Imam talking about? This is the bondage that the soul is stuck into this physical body and in this world. Then the Imam says, freedom does not come through physical death or suicide. Death is always followed by new forms. Death is always followed by new forms and bondage, one after the other. So you see, it is really important that we put this into perspective when Rumi says that, you know, he was an inanimate rock, that he was a plant and a worm and so on. Those are forms of bondages. And the Imam said that is always followed by new forms, and these were new forms and bondage, one after the other. Our tariqah promotes complete and total freedom of the soul. That means no bondage. After that, there should be this permanent, eternal rest of the soul and its permanent, eternal position that our tariqah teaches us through the blessings and teachings of the Imam. This is one of the reasons why our beloved Imam points out the difference between the Sharia and the Hakikat. And the Imam says, Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah alayhi salam gave this explanation, that there are two different things altogether. The Imam says, at the level of the Sharia, one prefers the book, the fast and prayer, and the other one yearns for freedom. The two are worlds apart. They shall never come together. Now, I hope you are understanding this in the right, constructive, positive concept. The Sharia, the Tariqah, the Haqiqah, and the Marifah. There are different stages in the practice and interpretation of the faith. The point I'm trying to make is that our tariqah, in relation to the practice of Islam, is based on the guidance of the Imam and is based on the haqiqat. And that haqiqat is the basis of the supreme truth the Imam declares to the murid for the freedom and salvation of the soul. That is our concept. The concept of nur, the concept of salvation, the concept of liberation. And therefore, we are less inclined to those areas and to those concepts that are not exactly what we believe to be in the interest of the freedom and salvation of the soul. Let's turn to the next slide. So let's say a quick word about our material destiny, because after all, one of the meanings of the word al-Qadr is destiny. So at this point, I will simply put before you a very important question, and that is, perhaps give you a quick analogy. When you look after your physical side of your life, and let's say you have some concern about your physical health or your physical being, to whom, this is the question, to whom do you entrust your physical body when you have a question about it? Let's say if it's a question about what foods are compatible to you. Well, you may go to a nutritionist. You may go to someone who is qualified in that area, maybe to a naturopath, and maybe to people who have the right training, understanding, credential for you to say, I entrust you my body, like your medical doctor, you're like your physician, and say, I have this problem, guide me, show me the way how to get out of it, and you know the rest. But when it comes to your spiritual destiny, ask yourself the same question. To whom have you entrusted your soul for your spiritual health, for your spiritual growth, for your spiritual enlightenment, for your spiritual destiny, and eventually for your spiritual salvation? To whom? Do you just go to any Tom, Dick, and Harry? Do you go to just anywhere else? Do you just open any site in the internet and say, aha, here is a site I should rely on because I think that is going to give me spiritual enlightenment or spiritual elevation or spiritual illumination? Really? Well, that's up to you to answer. The question is, to whom have you entrusted that? And there is a fundamental principle that guides that question. So in relation to our material destiny, I think the simplest way I can answer in the interest of time, there are two perspectives. There are many, but in summary. First of all, in our physical destiny, there is the notion of action and reaction. In many traditions, the notion of action and reaction is known as karma. The word karma simply means action. What kind of action do human beings perform? Human beings perform action at least by three means. We perform physical action, and there are physical reaction. We perform mental action, that is, things that goes on through your mind, your thoughts, your thinking, your reasoning, and so on. And there is that form of reaction. And then there is verbal action by speech, and there is that kind of reaction. So we say physical, verbal, and mental. Three channels of action that happens in a material sense. Now, I'm mentioning that because later on, when it comes to the aspect of preparation, I will have something more to say. But in our physical action and in our physical life, there is existence that comes to end. And perhaps one of the best way to illustrate or elaborate that is to say, if you look at anything that exists in the physical realm, whether it is the Earth, whether it is other planets, whether it is our galaxy, whether it is the universe itself, in which these hundreds of billions of galaxies exist, you will find that these principles basically underlie everything that is physical, that is existence to end. And that is, first of all, there is birth. Everything takes birth. Then there is growth. Then there is duration. And then there is the casting of byproduct. Then there is a decline. And then there is death. So you look at a human being, take the human being because that is the main focus, but it applies to everything in life. A human being is born, so there is birth. He grows up, we call growth. And then he lives for a certain period, there is duration. During this period, there are certain casting of byproducts. And when the time comes, there is decline. And eventually this human being dies, there is death. No one has been able to circumvent this cycle. Doesn't matter whether you were a king, a pharaoh, a pauper, doesn't matter who. But this is fundamental to remember. Therefore, the Imam says to us in many of his holy farman, the physical world is not permanent. You enter the physical world and then there is an exit. So that's our material destiny. As I say, a lot can be said, but I will leave that for now because it's also connected with our human life and the number of cycles the soul is taken in this human existence. Next slide, please. Now here comes spiritual destiny. So I will say something quickly about it, and then we will pass on to the preparation phase. So spiritual destiny. All murids of the Imam understand and know that in our tariqah, when a murid is born, one of the most important tariqah practice that we have is that of the holy bayat. Bayat means we are giving our oath of allegiance to the holy Imam. And in this oath of allegiance, we are saying to the Imam, everything that belongs to me, everything that is me in terms of my mind, everything in terms of my possession, and indeed my whole physical self, I submit to you and it is yours. We are submitting ourselves in totality to the will of the Holy Imam. Now remember, this goes back to the beginnings of the meaning of the word Islam. Islam means submission. It means submission to the divine will, unconditional submission to the divine will. What does that mean? In Islam, we believe through the use of the intellect, not fatalism, not blind faith as some people are always keen to put forward. We are speaking about the intellect, the illuminated intellect. Through the use of the intellect, the believer submits himself to the divine will in order to gain peace. This is an amazing spiritual formula right from the beginnings of time that our Holy Prophet taught that Islam signifies that. Islam signifies that. And we have the notion of peace in the second part of our dua, We have the notion of peace throughout our dua. We have the notion of peace that our Imam has taught us throughout the Holy Farmans and the 1400 years of the teachings of the Holy Prophet. But the fundamental key is submission to the divine will in order to gain peace through one's intellect and understanding. In our tariqah of Islam, it means submission to the holy farman of the Imam through one's intellectual illumination in order to gain divine mercy upon the soul. The soul receives divine light and divine mercy upon submission and intellectual illumination to the holy words and farmans of the Imam. Remember, the farmans of the Imam is the nur of the Imam made word. Farman is nur, and therefore holy farmans becomes the source of our illumination and salvation. Therefore, the whole of our tariqah is guided upon the holy farmans of the Imam. And how fortunate we are, how amazingly fortunate we are that our beloved Imam has released for the whole Jamaat his Diamond Jubilee Farman and others, which are a permanent source of spiritual illumination, spiritual elevation, spiritual understanding, and salvation of our soul. And I say to the murids of the Imam, make no mistake, when our beloved Imam releases farman like this, it is a source of our salvation and light into the intellect. So in this sense, our spiritual destiny, if you have followed the trend of thought I have sought to present from the beginning, we have entrusted our soul by virtue of our bayat to the Imam when we made this bayat. And we say to the Imam, Hazar Imam, guide my soul into this world, into dunya, and in the hereafter, when I leave this world, my spiritual destiny is in your hand, Mawla. Inna lillahi wa inna ilahi rajiun. So that is our birth to salvation, meaning that we will not eat from any other buffet out there. When it comes to our soul belongs to the Imam. Our soul will be guided by the Imam. Our soul will be illuminated by the Imam. And our soul will be salvated by the Imam. That is our conception of spiritual destiny. Next slide, please. Okay, we come to the preparation part. Next slide. I apologize for taking more time than I had planned for, but I hope I can make it fast. Now, this part is the practical part of Laylatul Qadr. And I would like to say, right from the outset, I am not here by any means to give a prescription. It is not my function to give a prescription as to what should be done and how should one behave himself and what should one do throughout the night of Laylatul Qadr. But what we can do is to share some perspective through our experience and give some ideas and thoughts that might be interesting. So first of all, there is the whole notion of our physical and mental preparation. What I mean by that is, if Laylatul Qadr is going to happen on May the 15th, and I think the date is correct, then try to prepare yourself not on May the 15th, not even on May the 14th, but this week, that is the next 5 days or 6 days till next Friday, is engage yourself into preparation. That means, most unfortunately, Jamaat Khana is closed, so it's difficult to bring the Jamaat Khana perspective at this moment. So I will say, notwithstanding the fact of our condition at the moment, but you can do a lot of preparation wherever you are. And ask yourself right from now, what must I do physically? What must I do mentally in order to prepare myself? Now remember, physical and mental preparation requires a super positive intention. In other words, you got to have the intention from now. You can't just create that intention the day before, because it takes time for both the body and mind to engage into that particular day. In other words, you set yourself an objective and said, my objective on the night of Laylatul Qadr, beginning on May 15th, is going to be the following. Now, I understand, I hope I'm not wrong, but I understand that there will be a program for the Jamaat on that particular day that will be webcasted. And I think you know very well those programs are amazing. They're amazing programs because there are various readings, various recitations, and various participation that enables the Jamaat throughout the night to remain alert and to remain prepared. So if indeed there will be such a program, engage yourself into those programs, because it is going to be a very powerful trampoline for that particular night. In addition to that, you yourself must be willing to engage yourself for this physical and mental preparation. You have to create this mental attitude and this positive state of mind that I'm going to stay up the whole night. Now, I am not saying this by way of imposition, but I'm saying this because when we speak about staying up the whole night, let me see if I can find that quotation for you, because in staying up the whole night, someone like Ibn Rumi has said something so wonderfully interesting that we need to sometimes, sorry, I should have gotten that in front of me, but well, I'm going to paraphrase it for you. I think that'll be easier. Why stay up the whole night? Someone like Rumi, someone like Shams Tabriz, and many other mystics, including the teachings in our tariqah, says, it says to the believers, do not let your sleepy attitude take you away. Now remember, we are creatures of habit. Human beings are creatures of habits. So we follow our habit. When nighttime comes and the time to sleep comes and the time to go to bed comes, we follow our habits. But this is the one night, and that's what I mean by super positive intention. You've got to say to yourself from now, no, staying up the whole night is not negotiable. Staying up the whole night is not negotiable. I will not be sleepy. And if I am, I'm going to take some intervention. I am not going to succumb to my tiredness. I am not going to give up in any other thoughts or any other habit that may come in my way and say, well, you're so tired, you need the rest, and so on. The idea is no. The idea is I have to stay up the whole night. And why should I stay up the whole night? I'm coming to that in a moment. Rumi says in that regard, there are treasures from the seventh heaven that comes to you, that descends. And it is a moment of transformation. Laylatul Qadr is an opportunity for transformation. Transformation. Remember that process. How did the Holy Prophet transform the whole world in which he lives and beyond through that revelation. It is this very revelation in our tariqah, through the grace, blessing, and guidance of the Imam, that on this 23rd night of the holy month of Ramzan, that our spiritual and material being receives transformation. And therefore, we cannot afford to lose one single second of that moment. You remember the verse in Laylatul Qadr? What will convey to thee what this night of Qadr is? It is better than 1,000 months. And there is peace until the rising of the dawn. Remember the concept of peace I mentioned? It has multiple perspectives, but that is it. Do you desire that peace? Or how? There is peace until the rising of the dawn. That rising of the dawn is connected with early morning prayers. And what happens then? What happens before that? What happens throughout that night? Look at the verse in the Quran. Angels and spirit descend with all decrees. I urge you to reflect on this sentence. Where do these angels and spirit descend from? Now this is the Quran. In it, it says, these angels and this spirit, they come down with all decree on this day. And there is peace until the rising of the dawn. So if you are sitting on that day at home and you are in anticipation with your super positive intention thinking to receive this grace, this mercy of transformation, what are those decrees that these angels and spirit will bring for you and your destiny? I would say to you, for those who understand the batin in our tariqah, and remember the batin is the esoteric, on that night, and so it should be all the time, but particularly in the practice, spiritually speaking, it is an act of complete and total submission to the will, grace, mercy of the Imam on that night that enables us to achieve the transformation and enables us to understand that that gate of salvation, which is Laylatul Qadr, is open to us every single day in our early morning prayers. But it should be understood, it is a gate of transformation. It is an opportunity for the transformation. It is not a mundane. Now, on the night of Laylatul Qadr, as many people do even in other days, they recite zikr tasbih. Let me quickly say something about zikr. What is zikr? Now there are many meanings given. Remembrance, invocation, repetition, and other descriptions that are given. But let me say this to you, that when you think about zikr in the context of spiritual practice, and it is a spiritual practice, remember this, zikr is a prayer of the heart. Keep it simple. Zikr is a prayer of the heart. Prayer coming from the heart, coming into the heart. And what happens when you engage the heart? The heart is the meeting point between that which is terrestrial and that which is celestial. Simply put, the heart is the meeting point between the physical and the spiritual. The heart is that which basically receives this transformation. If there is any sense of transformation that you seek to understand that what it is, it's going to be into the heart. Why? Because the heart is considered to be, in our tariqah, the throne of the Imam in the murid's being and heart. The heart must be, and it is the throne of the Imam. The throne of God is the heart of the believer. Who sits on the throne? Look at the surah of the throne in the Quran. I don't have time to go into it, but you know that was one of the ayats that was recited at the opening of the museum, I think it was. And in that regard, it conveys the meaning that it does. The heart of the mu'min is the throne of the Imam. Therefore, it is said, the heart should always be clean. And you can clean and polish that heart through zikr. That's why zikr is the polish of the heart. Now, in practice, this zikr are the various tasbihs that we recite in our tariqah and the various tasbihs that the Jamaat recites on that evening. And many of you remember the tasbih we recite during Laylatul Qadr. So try to see if you can have those tasbihs, because that night those tasbihs are important. And I emphasize, use the tasbih in our tariqah. These tasbihs are the ones that we engage ourselves in our tariqah for a very specific purpose. So the whole notion of why we recite Ginan, we recite Qasidas, we recite Mankabats, and we recite other forms of devotional recitations and poetry is all intended to enrich the heart, to illuminate our thinking, to elevate our spirit for the most important part and preparation for Laylatul Qadr, which is the time of Baytul Qiyal, early morning prayers. Remember, the whole secret of Laylatul Qadr is locked into Baytul Qiyal period. And you might say, how can you say that? Well, I will simply give you the indication from that very night. Ask yourself, where was the Holy Prophet when he received this revelation? In what state of mind or practice was he when this revelation came to him? History gives testimony that all Muslims accept the Holy Prophet was in the cave of Mount Hira, that is known as the mountain of light. Imagine this. Jabal al-Nur, the mountain of light. When that light, when that Nur descended on the Holy Prophet. I repeat, it was the Nur that descended on the Holy Prophet. And later on, that Nur, through that Nur, the Holy Prophet, in the methodology given to him by the divine, engaged in the next 23 years to reveal the message of the Nur, which was the Holy Quran. And therefore, the book becomes the silent Quran. Quran is Samit. And that which comes from the Holy Imam, it is Quran and Natik. The Imam is the spoken Quran. We go back to that origin. So the Holy Prophet was in a state of bangi, if you like. The Holy Prophet was doing his bangi into that cave. And in the state of that bangi, he received that illumination, he received that nur. Therefore, in the practice of our din, in the early morning prayers in Laylatul Qadr, it is the nur that is received and that creates the transformation. So when a murid is fortunate to be able to be touched by that light, then you will have received the ultimate gift of Laylatul Qadr and the ultimate divine knowledge and recognition of the Imam. And in that context, the gate of salvation for your soul is granted to you. So Laylatul Qadr is a fundamentally important aspect to our practice. Is there a next slide?
No, just a Q&A.
No? Okay. There is one more thing I need to add very quickly because I think it constitutes an important part of Laylatul Qadr. One of the aspects of Laylatul Qadr which we will not physically, I repeat, we will not physically be able to do because Jamaat Khanas are closed, and that is the concept of chanta. Remember, in our tariqah, Laylatul Qadr, the night of Laylatul Qadr, is also known as the night of forgiveness. And in this context, every Laylatul Qadr, we perform a very specific kind of chanta. And these chanta ceremony in Jamaat Khana are intended for the purification of body, mind, and soul. Do you remember earlier on I mentioned to you the 3 actions that we do? Verbal action, mental action, and physical action. So in the practice of chanta on the night of Laylatul Qadr, when we say Tobo Tobo Taksita Bando Sirtapa Gunegari Ashatu Bakshiye Bakshanha, or the variation of this formula, whatever you say, we say it 3 times. The first one is for your verbal errors and mistakes and sins. The second one is for your mental, verbal mistakes and sins. And the third one is for your physical mistakes and sins. So physical, verbal, and mental. Now, I have no notion how this could be affected on this particular night, because normally we would be in Jamaat Khana and receiving these chantas. But that is something not in my purview to basically say how it should happen. We will leave that to the authorities and powers that be. But it is important simply to bear in mind that on that night, Laylatul Qadr is the night of forgiveness. Now, these chantas are special because there are traditionally 15 chantas that are given. I don't have time to go into the details, but sometimes people are circulating the meaning of these chantas, but be that as it may, the point is there are different chantas for different aspects. Let me just take 1 or 2 of them. For example, one of them is the chanta that when we have made a mistake and not fulfilling our 3 du'as every day. The dua is an obligation in our faith. We have to say our dua. But let's say if you haven't said it or you forgot it, then this chanta takes care of that. Let us say you have been negligent, weak, forgetful, and maybe mistakenly not submitting your dasant. Then we have one chanta that the believer can engage on to seek forgiveness for mistakes in dasant. So you need to be sincere, you need to be honest about it, and make a vow that you will not repeat these mistakes and these errors. In that way, there are 15 chantas that are there. Actually, there are 16, but the 16th chanta, that is known as Mahadanna chanta, it's the sole prerogative of the Imam of the time. Only the Imam gives the chanta, and he delegates this authority to the Mukhi Kamariya, Mukhani Kamariyanis of the Jamaat when a murid is on his last breath or if a murid has left this world. So the 16th one is not given on Laylatul Qadr because it is the prerogative of the Imam, but this is the 15 chantas are part of the engagement in Laylatul Qadr. And therefore, the last item in this slide you can see is the understanding of Toba. Toba means literally, if I put it to you simply, when a person in their heart, in their mind, in their thoughts realizes that I have been mistaken, I have committed many errors, I have committed many sins, and they have remorse, and they feel they've done wrong. So what do? They turn towards the Imam, to seek forgiveness. And in this case, when we say Tawbah, the Imam turns towards the believer. The Imam is always there for us. But strictly speaking, that's what the word Tawbah means. You turn towards your Creator and He turns towards you. Now, if time permits, we can go deeper into the concept of Tawbah. But right from the beginning of Islam, we have always turned to Hazrat Ali for the function, grace and blessing of this. And you know there is a very important happening that Hussein ibn Abbas, during the time of Hazrat Ali, during the time of the Holy Prophet, witnessed that in the Battle of Camel. What did Hazrat Ali say in this regard? I have to stop here. I sincerely apologize. We wanted to finish this within an hour, hour and 15 minutes, but at least I think I have conveyed the key points of what I wanted to say, and there are many other aspects, but I leave that to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hassam. So I would like to thank everybody for coming and participating. I just want to be mindful of everybody's time. So this brings us to the end of the official formal webinar. If you would like to hang around for the question and answer session, you're more than welcome to. Dr. Hassam has graciously agreed to stay on and impart some more wisdom on his part. So I'll just quickly move on to the questions that we have been getting. The first thing that everybody wanted to your point when you said you would like to go deeper into the concept of Tawbah, people are interested to hear about that, if you would want to start with that.
When we are seeking forgiveness, or expressed into this notion of the concept of Tawbah, there are many ways in which our faith allows the believer to engage into the concept of forgiveness and to obtain that forgiveness. One of the ways, I mentioned, is through the concept of zikr. But remember one thing, what is the secret within the notion of forgiveness? You can ask forgiveness. You can express that invocation. You can do supplication. But there must be someone to accept it and someone to say, yes, I accept and forgive you. Let me see if I can find for you what Hazrat Ali said in this regard, because that sort of codifies many things. So Hazrat Ali said, he was first of all asked, Hazrat Ali was asked, which speech is best in God's eyes? So remember the question, because it's very important to make connection with this question being asked. So Mawla Murtaza Ali alayhi salam was asked, which speech is best in God's eyes? And Mawla Ali replied, a great amount of zikr, pleading, and supplication. He mentioned three things. And Hazrat Ali alayhi salam said, four things work to a man's benefit and not against him. So if you, and I'll come to those four things in a moment, all of them are honestly the bedrock of Laylatul Qadr. So Hazrat Ali said, a great amount of zikr. Now I've said something about zikr already, and I can go into further depth a little later. Pleading and supplication. This is so important. What is the meaning of pleading and supplication? I can only portray that and give you an example the Holy Prophet gave us. Because you see, when you do zikr, and let's say you may do zikr, if you're seeking forgiveness and you're saying the zikr of Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayhi, or you're doing zikr in the name of Ya Ali Ya Muhammad, and you are doing zikr with other tasbihs, always bearing in mind to whom are you presenting this zikr. Our holy peers have said, remember the concept of walayat I mentioned? Love and devotion to and for the Imam. In this notion of love and devotion to the Holy Imam, in here lies the secret of this pleading and of this supplication. But our holy peers have said, it is only, remember this, it is only through the love of Ali that sins get destroyed and obliterated. Therefore, this notion of love and devotion too for the Holy Imam. So now the notion of pleading and supplication in the concept of Tawbah, which is the question. How should that be? I mentioned the notion of the heart. The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Holy Prophet says, when you are pleading and when you are supplicating, be in such a state of mind like a beggar with his hand open is pleading for food and drink. Can you make that, can you bring that conception to your mind that if you were hungry for a week and your stomach is crying for that satisfaction, how would you beg and plead and supplicate for that food? In the same way, you plead and beg and supplicate for your spiritual transformation, for your forgiveness. Tawbah has inbuilt this idea in it. So through the notion of Tawbah, we recite the zikr prayer. And the various zikr that we do, remember, if it comes from the heart, then the response will be in the heart. But it must go beyond the mind, beyond the tongues, and enter the heart. So there is this, excuse me, there is this transformation. It goes from the tongue to the mind and penetrates the heart. Engage the heart. When we are sitting in prayers all the time, not only in Laylatul Qadr, it's the engagement of the heart that eventually brings that kind of response and understanding.